going to talk about components in software component model. Components in this model are conceptualized as encapsulated units and encapsulated entities that has a set of interfaces, and there are both types of interfaces. There are required interfaces and provided interfaces. All those interfaces are necessary because the composition mechanism in SOFA is through interface connection. And it's possible to build hierarchical components or have a hierarchical structure with software components. So it's possible to have composite components with subcomponents inside. We have different categories in software components. If it's in terms of roles, we have black box and gray box components, or if in terms of behavior, we can talk about primitive components and composite components. This is an overview about how it looks an application built with SOFA. So we have composite components that are components that inside have other subcomponents. We have provided interfaces and required interfaces, and the connection is between provided and required with different interface connections. And we have primitive components that are components that have a direct implementation of business logic. A Blackboard component is if a developer is develop an application and they need to reuse one component that is already built in the repository. They retrieve that component and they treat that component as a black box. So the only thing that they have to figure out is identify the provided and required interfaces and how to connect with that kind of interfaces. If we're talking about gray box components, we have two categories inside this. That is primitive component and composite components. Primitive components are those that it has direct implementation of code, so it's where all the business logic and data manipulation is done with some programming language. And in composite components, they don't have any direct implementation in code, just only define the different bindings between interfaces and which subcomponents comprise the composite component. And we have a delegation and presumption features that we are going to talk later with a picture. This is an overview how it looks at primitive components. So it's a box with a provided interfaces, required interfaces, and in this component content is where all the programming routines relies to make the data manipulation. In a composite components, these pictures, components 1 and 3 are composites, and they have inside different subcomponents. Some of them are primitive, like component 2, and some of them are other composite components, like component 3. And we use presumption and delegation to build in a hierarchical structure. Presumption is when one provided interface of one of the subcomponents is exposed in the parental component. And delegation is when one required interface of one of its subcomponents is exposed in the parent component. So it's the way that he used to build hierarchical components. The interface we have, as I told you before, we have provided interfaces and required interfaces. There are one extra that is called control interface, that is just only for purpose in runtime features that localize the component and change the behavior, and all the interfaces must be connected. The frame is like the boundary of the box that defines which are the interfaces that one component has. So the frame, later on we are going to see an example how it looks a frame, but it's a set of interfaces which in the frame specify which are provided and which are required interfaces. And it's not possible to connect do connections through the frame, so just only via interfaces in order to respect hierarchical structure of these components. And the architecture, if we're talking about the architecture, depends on which kind of component. The primitive components, the architecture is just only the class who has the main body of code or data manipulation. If we're talking about the composite, it's just only the list of subcomponents, the list of interfaces, and how they are connected. So this is all the terminology about components. Next topic is about